Greetings and salutations in our distance. This is Wolfphototech, and this is a little fun start for me here. So you have decided you are interested in playing Dungeons and Dragons 5th Edition. I have a naturally bad habit to avoid looking at the screen, but it's just one of those weird things. I don't like looking at the screen. But anyways, the first things first is that you have already decided that you want to play Dungeons and Dragons 5th Edition. Or any other edition of Dungeons and Dragons. The first thing you need to do, but the first thing you can do is type in Dungeons and Dragons on YouTube. And then subscribe to a variety of channels, like 5 to 10 channels. First and foremost, you can subscribe to WebDM, Nerdarchy, Dungeon Dudes. I said I was gonna write a script, but I didn't. WebDM, Nerdarchy, Dungeon Dudes, Nerd Immersion, pretty decent channel. And what else channel? Oh yeah. What's another really good channel you could subscribe to? I'll just leave it at that. Well, let's just say my channel. Let's go ahead. Oh yeah, there's a few other channels like the DM's Lair. That's a great channel. The Dungeon Coach is another really good channel. However, they're more DM-sided, where Dungeon Dudes is great for a general purpose player plus DM channel. WebDM is more gaming, Dungeons and Dragons, TTRPG gaming culture channel, but also gaming philosophies and stuff like that. You know, if you want to go deeper into your characters' developments and stuff like that, and understand culture and the social contract between players, those ones I've just listed are the great ones for players. If you are interested in becoming a dungeon master, I would suggest How to Be a Great GM. He's a really good channel. He's more focused on acting and culture and presentation as opposed to mechanics. However, if you don't need help on that so much, you can always look at the Dungeon Coach, which is another excellent channel. The DM's Lair is an amazing channel for DMs and in general. And then you also have WebDM, which is another great channel for DMs as well. WebDM is that Magic Sauce YouTube channel where they have played so many TTRPGs. Vampires the Masquerade, they've played Numenera, they've played Dungeons & Dragons, Pathfinder, Starfinder, Call of Cthulhu, all kinds of stuff. They've had so much experience playing so many different TTRPGs that they have developed this fluid philosophy of player, DM, GM relationship that you can really sink your teeth into and learn how to be a better player overall or DM. Though that WebDM is a universal channel. Also, Nerd Immersion is also a good general channel. It's more focused on news, and Dungeon Dudes is also another really good general channel. They're really good with mechanics and everything else. Everyone might also know Experienced to Level 3 and Runesmith. They are pretty decent channels, but they are more the funny, jokey kind. And then there's Joe Cat and his crap guide to D&D, which is also more jokey. So the reason why I didn't originally include those channels and a bunch of other channels is because some of them are more jokey channels that parody Dungeons and Dragons, and I did not include, the 800-pound gorilla that is known as Critical Role, because they are professional actors, and they are not just simply professional actors. They are award-winning professional actors doing a tabletop role-playing show. So it is not necessarily the best thing to watch them and think, oh my goodness, that is going to be our games, because they are so trained in the art of acting, and they've played so many tabletop RPGs, and the show is geared towards presentation and presentation, that it creates a wildly unrealistic perspective of what Dungeons and Dragons or any other tabletop RPG is like. You can watch them, but you always have. If you can watch Critical Role, but you have to remember they are professional, award-winning actors, and it is a show that is geared to being entertaining to the audience. That is very important. Now, you've heard me say Joe Crap. Joe Crap is his actual channel is Joe Cat, and he does all kinds of stuff. He does Monster Hunter and crap guides to D&D and all that other stuff. It's perfectly fine to watch that stuff. Just remember, it's all funsies and jokes. There are some solid good pointers in his videos, and as well as with Jacob and his experience to level 3, and Runesmith, and also another great channel is AJ Pickett. AJ Pickett is channel is very heavily into the lore of monsters and settings and cultures within Dungeons and Dragons, specifically Dungeons and Dragons. Okay, so those are the channels you really want to watch. If you want to be a good DM, I would say go watch Mr. Rex, and the addition to the previous list, you add Mr. Rex and AJ Pickett onto your list, because they cover a lot of monster ecology and world history on their channels. So those are really good options. What I'm going to mostly do is I'm going to start with some basic points and focus on the basic mechanics and just go from there, and I'll make sure that I'll be try to make it as clear and simple as possible when explaining what is spell slots, what is a prepared spell versus what is a spell known, key points, action economy, opportunity attacks or attacks of opportunity. It changes terminology depending on which Dungeons and Dragons edition you're playing in. And that is very important to keep in mind. However, it is also very important to keep in mind that Dungeons and Dragons is not difficult. I know people who have mental disabilities, and I have a bit of a disability impairment myself, so it's not hard to play Dungeons and Dragons. It's just a matter of getting the basic framework in mind, and then just adding a bit more as you go along. Now, as far as 5th edition is concerned, which is the current edition, as you can see, I have tons of little pieces of paper sticking out of the top of my book, because I get a lot of use out of it between all the games I play and all the cross research. That in the very beginning of the book, there's this wonderful section that starts out, the preface. Now, here's the fun thing. You can just skip that. Don't even worry about it too much. Then you get to the D20s and dice. You might want to read that. And then you get to creating a character, which takes you step by step through the whole deal. Now, there is, in fact, a free version of this, a limited free version of this. The free basic rules on the Wizard's website. I will go ahead and put a link to that in the description box below, and maybe even put it in the comment section in the video. once I get around to actually getting to it, because I usually have these videos go up at like 6 o'clock, so I still have an hour to get to it. So, yeah. I get out of work at 5, so. Now, when it comes to the races and classes, first and foremost, it is important to know when it comes to backgrounds and races that it is not at all critical that you optimize to match up your race to your class. I like to play Tabaxi myself because Tabaxi has the ability feline agility, which allows it to double its movement in a turn, and it recharge for one turn. But it requires to be recharged by standing still for one turn. And it also has dark vision, and proficiency in perception, which is really nice to have. There are numerous classes and races, and they're all good for the most part. Some of them are slightly better for some things than others, but it's all fairly close together. I'm not even on a race page. For quick reference, there's another game called Pathfinder, which is exceedingly similar to Dungeons & Dragons. The chapter on races. Another game that is very similar to Dungeons & Dragons is Pathfinder, and they use the term ancestries in that game. But I will cover that in more detail when I go over Pathfinder 1st or 2nd edition. I probably am going to do 2nd edition before 1st edition. It's kind of weird, but I'm starting with 5th edition for Dungeons & Dragons, so I might as well just go with it. This is, by the way, sitting up here is actually the original edition of Dungeons & Dragons right here. But, where I pointed. That's a complete set, by the way. So, you got the basic rules, the free download PDF basic rules I put in the description. And then that is basically the first thing you truly need. The next thing is you can, as a player, go through those basic rules and read them. Now, you can also use, say, your phone and go to, say, Google, and tell Google to roll a D20 or a D6, and Google will do so. Or you could download an app so it could roll your dice for you when you're playing a game. And there's also free sheets and stuff like that on the Apple Store and the Google Play Store and the various other app stores and sites where you can put all your information into and keep track of all that stuff for your character. Probably the easiest one is actually, say, probably the easiest one that you can encompass all those features around is the good old Dungeons & Dragons Beyond. And that's a really good site to go to, and it's also a pretty good place to buy your digital books or digital copies of your adventures or your guides or anything like that. However, if you want to, you can always buy physical dice or get them in the starter set or the essentials kit. Now, once you've read through the PDF and decided, yes, you indeed want to play Dungeons & Dragons, the next step you can go is either buy a player's handbook or the starter set or the essentials kit. These two are pretty much interchangeable. You can just pick one or the other, or get both. They come with dice. I literally pulled out one of the dice that comes with it. It comes with character sheets. It comes with a basic booklet explaining basic classes. So you can always combine information you get in here in these books with the information you get in your free PDF. You can also get the free book off of D&D Beyond. Sorry, I was going to say Dungeons & Dragons Beyond and Beyond, but it's D&D Beyond. They have a free rules book on that site as well that you can always access, and you get some free race options as well with that. So there's a bunch of free options you can download from Wizards, or go to Fantasy Grounds or D&D Beyond and use those to build your characters. And D&D Beyond has a nice little character building system and dice roller system that you can use to play your games off of. So all you really need is just your phone or a tablet and D&D Beyond or Fantasy Grounds or something like that to play. But if you want to, like, in person, once this COVID thing is over, or the coof, then you can just invest in one of these or one of these. You probably definitely want one of these. That's your first starting spot, and then you read through that. You do not have to read through the whole thing. All you really truly need to do is read the basics on how to create a character, which I will cover in more details in a future video. Read through the various races. Pick the one out that you enjoy or think will fit it fairly well with your class you're going to choose. I actually tend to like to choose race-class combinations that offset the weaknesses of the other ones. However, some people like to stack strengths and be more powerful. However, numerically, this does not amount for much. All it typically does is like give you an extra +1 in a stat. That is your prime stat, which only makes things slightly better for you some of the situations, but not all. There's numerous things, and each D&D group has a variation of how they like to play, so you don't have to worry too much. And oftentimes a lot of DMs will either not beat the crap out of you when you're a new player, or just kill your first character and make a new one just to get you over the fear of your character dying. Which is also another very important thing. Your character may in fact die, and that should be like, okay, that is the end of the story or the beginning of a new story for that character or characters. And too many new players are way too scared over their characters dying, and you really should not be that way, because one of the biggest problems in D&D in this day and age is that a lot of players are way too concerned that their characters are going to die, and the DMs are way too concerned that if the player's character dies, the player might not want to play anymore. The problem with this is if characters do not die, and you just go from one point, however deep into a campaign you go, eventually the excitement is going to wear off and you're going to get bored. And that is going to harm the enjoyment of the game. The downs make the ups more exciting. And sometimes the downs are the excitement, because your character might die, but they might die in a really cool way that is really poetic for the character or something or other. Yet again, as the big bonus in TTRPGs is, unlike a video game, there is not exceedingly strict structure for things to happen. So when you and the DM want to adjust things in the game or campaigns, you can do so, and you can add feats, you can add classes, you can add races, you can subtract stuff, you can add levels, you can subtract levels, and you guys can customize all kinds of crazy things into the game, and also subtract things out of the game to add more impact in certain situations. So that's truly one of the great strengths of a TTRPG, is the raw flexibility of the game, but also the capacity to mold events to a degree in which it results in a deeper, more impactful moment. And that truly allows for the game to be more epic in the end, if you can accept that there is death, there is salvation, and then there is also the darkness and the light, and 1,000 shades between and beyond. So, I'm sorry if this got into a little rambly ramble about gaming TTRPG culture, but Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition is actually a pretty simple game to learn how to play. And as I said, once you looked through the races, and the classes, and you have a basic idea how to put together a character, you can use one of these sheets. Boop. This is actually my favorite style of sheet, by the way. There's a few lacking features on that sheet. Like they don't have a money spot for that type of sheet. But then there's also sheets like this, which are basically more basic. Or the standard sheet, which is more like this. And then a lot of this stuff on this sheet you do not have to worry about. Actually, I kind of like that version. Might use that version more. Because it removes the bonds and the personality traits, ideals, bonds, and flaws. There's actually a variety of sheets, and then I know some people who like to customize sheets for different styles of gameplay. And as I said before, that is part of the beauty of TTRPG. There's a raw amount of customization you can do to make the game more fun for you and your party, but also you can make it more impactful and more tragic and more exciting and all kinds of stuff. So, basic stop through on the classes. And I'm just going to do the basic classes, is that first and foremost, we got ourselves the Wonderful Barbarian. The Wonderful Barbarian, or I just plain old Barbarian, is primarily a melee fighter. You can use some ranged attacks in there, but, you're primarily a melee fighter. You rage out, you rush in, and you pound things down in a rapid set of strikes. You gain abilities that make it harder for your enemies to do damage to you, and also in the sense of reducing damage, but also avoiding some damage. And you basically throw off a lot of damage. There's numerous subclasses that modify this in various ways. But they're primarily a strength constitution class. You do not need the mental stats or the personality stats as much. You should have like a decent dexterity to go to your barbarian too, to make sure you land your hits. But you got like 2 prime stats, a secondary stat, and a bunch of dump stats you can just dump right in. And to explain when my terminology is, a primary stat is a stat you want to ideally put your high scores in. You do not have to have a really high score, but you want a positive score, and you want to put your best scores typically into one of these 2 stats, or the stat that I refer to as a prime stat. The secondary stat is a stat if you happen to have another really good good roll, or you want to use point buy or something else other than that, and you want that to be decent, or that should be decent into the positive area as well. But it is not a prime stat. It's not something you really want to have as high as everything else, and it doesn't power your features as well as your prime stats. Dump stats, obviously there's tertiary, quadrutiary, and down, but when I refer to something as a dump stat, is basically like you could have it like as low as you want it, and you could play into that. Like you can have intelligence like being 8 or a 3 or 4 or something like that on your character. In the case of a barbarian, you could have intelligence that is a 6, and you could play off of that and make a joke about, ha ha ha, I'm a stupid barbarian, and just goof around with that, or have like a a 9 charisma or a 10 wisdom or something like that. It doesn't really matter. A dump stat is basically a stat that it doesn't power terribly many features of your character class, or absolutely no features. It's in that there might be something that it might be helpful with, but it's not that important. You could trash it. So when I say something is like a dump stat, that's what I basically mean. So in the case of barbarians, you ideally want your primary stats are your strength and constitution. You ideally you want those in the positive, and it's always typically good to do so. You can actually play a barbarian with weak strength, low strength, and high dexterity and high constitution, and that works out perfectly fine. In fact, one of the features for the barbarian is the unarmored defense, which calculates off its constitution and dexterity. So if you have your dexterity and constitution high, one of your primaries and one of your secondaries, you're perfectly fine. You can have a low strength. Barbarian features have some compensation there for low strength, you know. You gain advantage on strength saving throws and stuff like that, and it all works out just fine. You don't have to worry about having super high stats. In fact, some of the best games are low stats because it actually teaches you and shows you can play perfectly fine with a low stat, and the games actually can go longer. The campaigns can go longer because if you have low stats, you have more to grow. The DM has more range of monsters he can throw out there. If everyone like power rolls those and gets really high stat characters, or use point buy and optimizes the snot out of everything, the DM has a much smaller range of monsters he can use in that situation to give you a challenge, and the games can potentially stall out and become more generic because the variety of monsters is greatest at the low levels, and as you go towards high levels, you get narrower and narrower selection until you only got a few varieties of monsters at really high levels. In that point, there's not very much range. You just have to start homebrewing stuff to get them into the game. So really low level stuff is oftentimes low stats and low levels is like the broad variety, many flavors versus territory. Sure, you have a higher chance of dying, but you know that's what you accept. You have an opportunity to grow as a player and a character and a person in the world. So the awesome thing about the barbarian is you can play it Dexy Constitution or Strength Inc. Constitution, and you're awesome. You got like 3 dump stats. You can like literally leave in the dumpster. However, if you ever choose to do so, and go and play in one of those stats being high, like intelligence, like you're a sophisticated, intelligent barbarian, or a scald barbarian, you know, a charisma barbarian, or a barbarian with good wisdom, that is like something you can do. You have fewer features to play into those stats, but the next thing is our first little caster class is Bard, or the musician of the group. Bards are decent at melee, and they have decent magic. They can also use weapons. Typically, bards are more dex, charisma, 1 physical, 1 melee, 1 physical, and 1 mental. It is important to note that bards also do need. You can go and throw in constitution on that list, but your primaries are your dexterity and charisma, and your secondaries are basically strength and constitution. It's always nice to have your constitution and strength in a decent spot, because if you have higher strength, you have more variety of weapons to use. However, the bard features and bard stats, bard features basically works between dexterity and constitution. dexterity and charisma. Sorry about that. So it's charisma, dexterity. And then you could option in or have decent strength and constitution, and you're perfectly fine. Wisdom, that's your intelligence and wisdom. You can have those as dump stats or tertiary stats, because there is some gain having those stats. It's not be total garbage, but then you're pretty good. You'll find a fascinating factor is that there's like 3 different categories of classes. There's the martial classes, there's the hybrid classes, and then there's the caster classes. Bard is a hybrid class. It's a mix of melee and magic. You're perfectly good. You can do all kinds of stuff. You have some healing, you have damaging spells, status effects. You're a jack of all trades. You literally have an ability called Jack of all trades, okay? Which basically makes you decent at everything you are not proficient at. And you can modify the bard from there. Bards, as I said, are charisma casters. They power their spells off of charisma. Ideally, you want, if you're going to go with a spellcasting bard that you're going to do a lot of spellcasting with, and you want to do a variety of damaging effects and all kinds of fun other stuff that causes rolls. You want your charisma being higher. However, you want to lean it towards more of the melee side. You want your dex or strength a bit higher. And that's it. As I said, bard is a primary charisma dexterity, secondary constitution, sliding towards, or it's tertiary but still secondary, is strength, and then tertiary, quadrutiary into dumps into the whole thing called dump stats is your intelligence and your wisdom. Hybrid classes have a slightly more finickiness to your stat arrangements, where if you're playing like a melee class or martial class, you pretty much are just using dex and constitution, or dex and strength constantly. And then we move on to the next one, which is cleric, which is actually a primary wisdom and strength or constitution. You kind of have like 3 primary stats, or 2, depending on how you want to build this character out and what subclass you play with. Yet again, it's another hybrid class. You got casting and you got melee, so you're good. You got a broad range. Side note, backing up towards bard, but also including cleric. Those are the 2 classes that there's so much variety in those 2 classes, in their subclasses, that you can literally have a party that is nothing but clerics, or a party that is nothing but bards. And depending on the combination of subclasses, you can cover pretty much all the little holes in there. You want your cleric to be, you want a cleric that is more like covers the spot of the rogue. There's a trickster domain cleric. You want more of a wizard sort of territory, you got arcana or light domain clerics. You want the classic Healy cleric, that's life, okay? Life also grants you some tanking ability for your cleric, as well as the war domain. So much of the cleric ties into its subclass. That's why I'm kind of including it into this talk more here, because unlike the many other classes which get their subclass at 3rd level, you get yours at 2nd. Actually, yeah, it's 1st, I think, actually. Yeah, it's 1st. I'm like having a brain fart here. I forgot for a moment it's at 1st, and then I remember, yeah. Yeah, it's 1st level. I had like a brain fart and I said 2nd level, but it's 1st. And that's one of those things, But when it comes to the cleric, you got a broad range of options there. You do not play clerics like MMORPGs where you heal, 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 heal. You play clerics like you're beating stuff up. Something's happening. You cast a spell for protection, or someone goes low. Oh, you heal them quickly to get them back up. Or someone hits the ground and then you run over to stabilize them and heal them. Stuff like that. You're kind of like running over, putting a band-aid on, giving them enough of what they need to get back up so they can heal up more or on their own and get themselves into a safe spot. Stuff like that. So clerics and bards are in that one little territory where you can have entire parties just made of them. And it's perfectly fine. They are primarily, as I said before, wisdom and strength / constitution. You can have you kind of pick off between, do you want really high strength or really high constitution? If you're going with the heavy armor clerics, you want higher strength. That way you are not penalized for having chainmail on. However, if you're going with non-heavy armor wearing clerics, you can go focus on constitution. But you can perfectly balance having all three of those stats high. Your dexterity is basically your secondary, tertiary stat, and your intelligence and charisma can be your dump stats. You're not harmed by having those low. Ideally, you want your dexterity high enough that it's not a negative. And you want your wisdom and your strength to be the highest stats overall. And your constitution to be also decent. So that basically covers that point. And it's hard to see my clock. This might turn into a part 2 or part 3. And by the way, clerics have the most domains of all classes. And then we got another hybrid class in the druid. The druid is that fun little class that you can change into animals. You're decent at beating people up in melee. You got some damaging spells. Yet again, much like the cleric, the druid is a replication of the cleric, except that the druid is a wisdom dexterity class. However, your only true primary stat is your wisdom. Your only true primary is your wisdom stat. Okay, people? You can have pretty much everything else be terrible. Not everything else be terrible, but you can have everything else downhill from your wisdom. As long as your wisdom is good, you got your spellcasting, and you got wild shape, so you can always substitute your physical stat weaknesses for your wild shape, and you can always be casting spells. Now, it'd generally be a good idea to have a fairly high dexterity / as constitution. So I would actually kind of say that your primary is wisdom, your secondary / primary is constitution, and then your secondary would be strength, and your straight up secondary would be your strength and dexterity, and then downhill from there is intelligence and charisma. Yet again, druid is another one of those classes that has enough variety in its spells and abilities, that you could kinda have an entire party of nothing but druids. They do have healing ability. They can and do some heavy melee damage. Nothing says as oh my goodness, as turning into a bear and then just mauling opponents with it. And a nice perk of wild shape is that when you get beaten up enough that your HP as a bear drops, you revert back into your normal form, where you had whatever HP you had when you turned into a bear. So you can tank by switching into other animal forms and just keep going, So you don't even need to have a really good constitution, strength, or dexterity. Your wild shape basically replaces that. And the only stat you truly would want to have high is your wisdom for everything else. Okay? So I think I'm running out of time. So thank you very much for watching. I'm going to continue into a part 2 with the fighter, the monk, the paladin, the sorcerer, the warlock, and the wizard, as well as the artificer, which is included. The artificer is included in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, and where's Eberron? Eberron Rising from the Last War. So if you enjoyed this video, please leave a likey on it and consider subscribing. If you dislike this video, please leave a dislike on it and put in the comments below explaining what you don't like about the video. I realize I don't have any graphics or anything up here, but I don't really think I really need to put up a lot of graphics, and I don't have the equipment to do so. So that's where I am with this, okay? I'm just being right there to the point. If anything, I will put this information or reduplicate some of this basic information into the comments below. But as I said, you know, there's a variety of classes here, and they cover different areas, but many of those classes overlap with other classes, and when you choose different subclasses, you can optimize or build on top of that lean in any direction. So that's part of the fun of D&D and any tabletop RPG. Have a delightful day, a nice night, and have a wonderful week, a magnificent month, and see you next time.